suggestions for kind of structural or institutional changes kind of within bureaucracy or departments to help maintain this lower level of
I do, actually. Let me start with one of the root causes of how these organizations have grown, because I've been thinking about it a lot, and it wasn't just Obama, and it wasn't just Bush. It's been going on for decades. If you're a GS-15, you think, how do I get to be a GS-16? You get to be a GS-16 by building up your empire. So you're constantly thinking up new things that you can do and new responsibilities you can take on. And there's a natural tendency for everybody in the government to want to try and acquire more people and acquire more territory because that makes them get paid more. There's no countervailing force coming from Congress. Somehow or another, the Congress just lets these organizations, all of them, just get bigger and bigger. And the proof statement is on an aggregate basis. That's what happens. Now, I've asked myself, why is this? I mean, why? Lots of good people go to Washington. Why can none of them ever seem to get it straight? And I've been thinking, well, part of the reason is the type of people that we send to Washington. When you think about it, Washington's dominated by lawyers, by bankers, and by academics. And the Congress in particular is dominated by lawyers. More than half the Congress is people with law degrees. And the nature and the skill sets of these professionals are they speak, they write, and then they allocate money. So when all the words have been spoken, and they've got them all written down, and they've got their 2,000-page bill, and they've allocated the money, they think, we've done our job, because that's their perception of what their job is. And then when that doesn't work, they cook up some other piece of legislation, and they speak more, and they write more, and they allocate more money, and then they pound their chests and say, we've solved the problem. And then when that doesn't work, they cook up something else. But the problem is that that's not when the job is done, when you've allocated the money. You know, in business, you realize that when the money gets allocated, that's when the job begins. It's not when the job ends. You know, you've got to manage organizations. You've got to hold them accountable to objectives. You've got to, turn them around when they go off course. I think if as a start, and I'll tell you, how I've come into companies that the investors have thought were lost. And it starts with very basic, simple things. You know, you go into an organization and you say, the first thing I do when I step into a takeover situation is I say, I want to see the general ledgers for the last 6 months. I want to know where every check went. And I want to just visually get a feel for how money is being spent. Then you go and you start saying, okay, your organization, Department of Labor, your organization, Health and Human Services, what did you accomplish over the last year? Let's list it. What happened that was good for the taxpayers? Now, what did that cost us? And which part of what you accomplished is essential and do we want to make sure we keep? What would should those essential things have costed us? And let's work it from the other way and say, on a value creation basis, what are you doing that needs to be done for the taxpayers? And how much should it cost to do that? That's really how we've got to manage the government. Not, oh, you've got 100,000 employees, well, then obviously you need to keep having 100,000 employees. It's what are the essential things that you need to do? And how many people and how much money should it take to do that? And we've got to examine that on a case-by-case basis. You know, I think one of the best run organizations in government is the military. Certainly from being effective at what they do, they're good. Are they efficient with it? Absolutely not. You know, when you're spending $400 a gallon for gasoline in Afghanistan, you got to say, what on earth are we doing there? We're bleeding to death. You know, we've got to find ways to get our neighbors to help us with these projects. And we've got to decide what are the essential missions of government, and how do we do that as economically as possible. So it's a bottoms-up process. What did you accomplish over the last year that was meaningful? What did you accomplish over the last year that we needed to have done? And what's the most cost-effective? We were starting from scratch. How would we build an organization to do those things? Now, how does that organization that we've just constructed on paper look compared to the one we've already got? And how do we migrate from that to this? That's what you have to do for every single department of government, because every single one of them is bloated, and every single one of them is inefficient. And you've got a lot of overpaid people, and you've got a lot of very earnest, good people that are doing jobs that don't need to be done.
You made a comment earlier. You said we just have to trust in the system.
Right.
Which system exactly are you referring to?
Capitalism.
Okay. You see 2009, the debt deficit is obviously going off the charts.
Right.
Does that not have a lot to do with the financial bailout of the government of private industry?
It does. And I'll tell you, one of the jobs of government is the Securities and Exchange Commission. The Securities and Exchange Commission did a dismal job. Everybody in the private sector, believe me, is not good. In fact, there are some notorious examples of horrible businessmen that went a long, long way before they were stopped. Jeff Skilling, who was the CEO of Enron, happened to be a classmate of mine in graduate school. Unfortunately, he's in prison. But every now and then, you're going to get a bad apple like Dennis Kozlowski at Tyco, or Jeff Skilling at Enron, or Bernie Madoff with this huge scam. How Bernie Madoff went so long without the regulators figuring it out? But that's what the Securities and Exchange Commission is for, to be the policeman for the system. And they utterly failed. And they failed over and over and over again. I'll give you another one. Bernie Evers from WorldCom. Bernie Evers, I mean, that was one of the biggest companies in America, and Bernie Evers single-handedly wrecked it. So government has to have an oversight. It's got to be a capable oversight. And we haven't had that. But despite the fact that these organizations are populated with imperfect human beings, and every now and then you're going to get a notoriously imperfect human being, you have to trust the system. It's really the industrial engines that created a unique America. There's a book that I started to read, and I'm not very far into it, but it basically talked about the inventions of the last 100 years. I mean, think about what the American system was created. We invented the automobile, the airplane, the electric light bulb, on and on and on. The greatest inventors of all time really came from the last 200 years in America. And when you have a free enterprise system and capitalism, and it needs to be regulated. It does. There's a role for government. But the government can't say, we're going to run all these industries because we can do it better, because the proof statement is they haven't. And I just gave you a list of examples of things that should do well, should be running well, that are not. They're insolvent or they're bankrupt. But I think that our founding fathers set an amazing example for future representatives of the people. And they set an example that has rarely been matched. When you think about it, the Declaration of Independence, which was signed by 56 patriots, 3 of them were from here in New Hampshire, William Whipple, Matthew Thornton, and Josiah Bartlett. Those 3 and 53 others from the other colonies got together and they set the ultimate example of what a public servant is, because they put their countrymen above themselves. They put themselves at great personal risk, and many of them suffered great personal consequences as a result of having signed that Declaration of Independence. Those 56 people became instant enemies of the most powerful man on earth, King George, and the most powerful country on earth, which was England. But that's a public servant. They didn't go down there thinking, we're going to stay forever and we're going to enrich ourselves. They were people of accomplishment before they went to Philadelphia or to Washington. They went down and they did their job. And then they returned to their families and their farms and their businesses. And that's what we need to get back to, rather than a ruling class, a political bureaucracy.